Okay, so now we're actually going to talk a little bit about the Founding Fathers. We just have a few quotes that we would like to read and go over. Since we are speaking of how it's mankind that is changing the world and not God. So first I'm going to actually do a quote from Thomas Jefferson, which, just as a reminder, he's the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He was very well learned in sciences and art and politics and had respect for them all. He was actually president of the American Philosophical Society and, of course, president of the United States, at one point. Also, he was very interested in science and invention. He was also interested in religion and in philosophy, and so he liked talking a lot about this stuff. So this is a quote that was made on the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence from Jefferson's last letter that he ever wrote. So it says, May it, American independence, be to the world what I believe it will be, to some part sooner, to others later, but finally to all. The signal of arousing men to burst change under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume the blessings and security of self-government. That form which we have substituted restores the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. All eyes are opened or opening to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately. These are grounds of hope for others. For ourselves, let the annual return of this day forever refresh our recollections of these rights and an undiminished devotion to them. Which covers everything that we've talked about today. I think that's a very heavy and beautiful quote, which of course he's saying, you are held down by religion, and we're encouraging you to free yourselves from it and, have the freedom to have your own opinions, your own thoughts, use your reason that, that you've been given, or that you have, and, be open to science as well, and don't just take on this mentality that people, that some people are put in their high place because they have God's, permission to be, and don't just accept your lot in life. Change it, since you're allowed to do so.
No, it's nice because, especially today, we have so much going on in this country with so many ridiculous rules and so many things, people trying not to offend every single party with this watered down version of what they want to do but not doing it. And it's just nice that it's recognized back then by somebody that is so important to our history, that he can recognize this and say these things and be proud of these things, that he knows that he wants this to be the America that he has in his mind.
I'm afraid that he would be very disappointed with today's America, what's going on.
Fatally disappointed.
I'm surprised they haven't tried writing him out of the history textbooks.
Yeah, I mean, for someone to make these kind of statements back then, and it sounds absurd today, to go, he said these things, and not know about it is shocking,
I mean, the fact that he could say it back then very openly and that he was one of our presidents just goes to show you that, back then people were probably, at least the people who started running things were,
free thinkers.
Yes, they were free thinkers and not laid down by superstition and religion.
Right.
All right, so a quote from Thomas Paine, who's the author of Common Sense, which was, a text that actually helped to raise people's awareness before the American Revolution happened. He says, a nation under a well-regulated government should permit none to remain uninstructed. It is monarchical and aristocratical government only that requires ignorance for its support. Which actually sounds very much like what's going on today.
Yep.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that it seems like the government does want to keep uninformed and not learned because, of course, if you look at, for example, our nation's budget, there is not a lot that's going to education. A lot of it's going to military, or I should say the Department of Defense. I'll just say the Department of Defense. And it's not going toward education. It's not going toward, say, something like NASA,
Right.
who, by current legislation, is only getting a half penny for every dollar spent. That is not a lot of money.
Wow.
They actually used to get more. Now they don't. This is a very, very good quote, because he's talking about the type of government that runs on ignorance. And that is exactly what today people are trying to turn our government into.
Right. The more homeless people are, the more kids dropping out of school, the less we teach them in school. It's these kinds of things that we want to fight against, and no one's really doing it because we can't change it because it's God's will. But the stupider we are, the easier it is for them to do crazy stuff, and then we go, oh no, but I didn't vote for that.
Right. Or they didn't know about it at all.
Right.
So what's our next quote here? This is another from Thomas Jefferson, who just has a whole wealth of fantastic things to say, of course. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Which is why today we should not have situations where in front of courthouses there are monuments of the Ten Commandments. They don't go together, and they should never go together, because there is that separation of church and state. And there are a lot of people, especially Republicans, who want to say, well, this is a Christian nation built on Christian values. Well, maybe there were some Christian values like slavery and the oppression of women, but today we're pretty much away from that. And as you can see, even the founding fathers, it's not just Thomas Jefferson, it's Benjamin Franklin, George Washington. Thomas Paine wasn't really a founding father, but he was a very prominent figure back then. So of course we know his name. None of them were Christian in the traditional sense, and they knew very well that they had to keep church and state separated. So keep the government separate from the church, which is why if you read the Declaration of Independence, there is no mention of God. As a matter of fact, well, I would bring up the Pledge of Allegiance, but actually that didn't come into existence until much later. But even then, when it did come into existence, there was no mention of God originally. That wasn't added later, I think, until, who was president? Jimmy Carter? Don't quote me, because I really don't remember. But the original Pledge of Allegiance had no mention of God, because it, again, is an issue of separation of church and state. Actually, a very curious thing happened recently where a court ruled against this group that was trying to get rid of, basically some people wanted to set up this Christian preaching station right outside a courthouse or outside a government building. The church ruled in favor of the religious people and was like, okay, you can have your table. So now they also had to rule in favor of some atheists to set up a reason station. Right across from the Christian table. In another case, there was the case of having the Ten Commandments outside. The judge, though he should not have, again ruled in favor of the Christian people, of the Christians who put it there, and said, okay, keep it. And now the Church of Satan quickly actually stepped in, and they're actually going to be putting up a satanic statue of their own, which is, I had to look at it. It's very nice. So,
oh, lovely. No, it's just, I mean, when it comes down to it, religion is personal. Mm-hmm. It's a personal experience. As you said, it's between a man and his God, whatever God it may be. It's got nothing to do with government. It's a personal thing that should be separated, and that's what it was intended to be, but now it's everywhere.
And one thing that I always hear is, well, if it's, it is personal, so why are you atheists getting so upset over this thing that you don't even believe in? And why are you bashing on Christians? What we're bashing on is the fact that you're trying to change law.
Yeah, that
in your
you're
favor.
forcing us to partake in this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're upset about. I'm not upset about
Right.
religion. I love learning about religions. I love finding out new things. I love researching these things.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm against is being forced to do these things because religion.
Exactly. There's a lot today that, for example, public schools that are government funded, you see prayer circles before a football game. I don't know that God cared so much about football. I guess he does, especially if you go on his Twitter account. But it's just, that's not something that should happen, especially if you have an atheist student that doesn't want to partake in that. And everyone knows that school is a very bad place for bullying to happen.
Right.
And people will always bully somebody else who's different just because they're different.
Right.
Anyway, let's not digress. I think we have another quote
Yep.
that you wanted to read.
We've got a last quote from our beautiful John Adams. It was a letter he wrote to Dr. Price back in April 1785. This is just a fantastic quote. It says, "We should begin by setting conscience free. When all men of all religions shall enjoy equal liberty, property, and equal chance for honors and power, we may expect that improvements will be made in the human character and the state of society."
They're very, very beautiful.
Yeah, I mean,
That, my friends, is nothing that you will find in the Bible.
no, all religions, all people, everybody, it doesn't matter. It's a personal thing. It doesn't matter. Why are we forcing these concepts onto everyone and then segregating ourselves and going, well, he said it different. I don't like it. It doesn't matter. Just let go of these things so we can improve what we have. And what we have is this earth.
Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a lot I do actually want to get into on that, because it's very interesting, because I know that, we do ask these questions. If it's personal, why are you guys trying to make it so public? But I think that's another whole lecture on itself.
Right.
But I can actually answer from that religious point of view, because I know exactly why they do it. It doesn't make it right, but I know why they do it, and I think that this is something that needs to be talked about.
Right.
Another time. But since we are, again, talking a little bit too about Christian viewpoints, there's a video on YouTube that we're actually going to be talking a bit about. The title of the video, he actually says that he's going to go over evolution, although evolution is only one of the topics that he addresses. However, he does ask some questions within that video, and he gives his own viewpoints. And we're going to answer those questions. So here it is.
All right, we are on to video number 4. We're going to start dealing with evolution. So, what are we going to do about evolution? First of all, we need to define it. There are 2 types of evolution. There is microevolution. Microevolution is minor variations within the same kind of thing. For instance, the dog kind. You might have about 200 or 300 different kinds of dogs, but they are all in the dog kind. So a dog is a dog is a dog is a dog. The cat kind. There might be, 50 different, 100 different kinds of cats, but they're all just a cat. Same thing with birds, same thing with people. Different kinds of people, we're all just people. That's microevolution. There are no people who believe in the Bible that do not believe in microevolution. That's obvious. God is a creator of infinite variety, and He created us all and His entire creation with the ability to change in dynamics, a little bit here and a little bit there, but it would never change from one species to another, which is what macroevolution is. So let me just give you a brief example. Macroevolution, let's say that you have a cat, and evolutionists will say the cat, given enough time and chance and mutations, could turn into a dog. Obviously, the dog would be the next one up on the scale from a cat, since it's a superior animal. At least that's what the guys are saying, right? Well, that never has happened. It's never been observed to happen. There's no evidence for it, and we're going to get into this. Now, here's the sneaky part. People that talk about evolution, when they talk about it, we know they're talking about macroevolution, but to try to dissuade you from keeping up with the argument, they discuss microevolution. So don't fall for that. But let's get down to the Big Bang. Now, what's the Big Bang? Well, evolutionists will tell you that in the beginning, there was nothing but a small piece of element this size or smaller than the head of a pin, where all the planets, space, elements, and everything was condensed into that small ball that was smaller than a pin, and then a pinhead, then it blew up. Now here are some questions for people who believe in the Big Bang. Number one, if just the Earth by itself was condensed to that side, first of all, what would be strong enough to crush it down to something that small, unless it was God who did it? Second question, it must have weighed a lot. I mean, if we just take the Earth by itself, it weighs a lot. I mean, think about the weight involved here with just a single planet as small as the Earth. Well, if something weighed that much and it was smaller than the head of a pin, how did it float apart from God? How did it float in space apart from God? Next question, where did that pinhead come from? I mean, evolutionists need to answer these questions. Next question, if all the matter in space was inside something the size of the head of a pin, then what was that pinhead floating in since space was inside of it? Another interesting question. Also, how did non-living matter have enough intelligence to turn itself into living matter? Another one, what came first, oxygen or living matter? I mean, if living matter came first, where did the oxygen come in? And if oxygen came first, where did it come from? Also, when has an explosion ever produced order? This is something you have to believe if you believe in the Big Bang Theory. But let's cover the missing links, the supposed missing links. There are no missing links in the fossil records. We're going to deal with all of them. And by the way, Charles Darwin said, and I quote, "As by this theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. The number of intermediate links between all living and extinct species must have been inconceivably great." But we don't even have a single missing link anywhere in the world. Now think about this. If man evolved from primates, and there are over 6 billion people on the earth, shouldn't we have at least 100 million, maybe a billion, half monkey, half man running around? I mean, if evolution was true, you would see them all over the place, but we don't have that. We have about 5 or 6 supposed missing links, but let's deal with them. Nebraska man. Nebraska man was created from a single tooth that was discovered in Nebraska. It was based only on one tooth and a lot of imagination. It was sketched with imagination, complete with a skull, skeleton, tools, and even a family. But the tooth was later found to have come from an extinct pig. Piltdown man. Piltdown man was a deliberate hoax. It was put together to see if people would fall for something that was obviously false, and they did. Java man. Java man was constructed from widely scattered bones. There was a skull cap and a femur found that were very far apart in a gravel deposit, but they were actually unrelated parts of a human being and a giant gibbon, which is like a monkey. Peking man. Peking man was based only on monkey-like skulls that were bashed in at the back of the skull. But because they were found with various animal bones and tools, it was assumed that these tool-using apes were man's ancestors. But instead, it was later discovered that these animals were man's meal, and the tools were used on them and not by them. Let's go to Neanderthal man. Neanderthal man was determined to be completely human, a modern people with a well-developed culture, art, and religion, but who suffered from a dietary deficiency. Some say rickets and others say arthritis. Lucy. Now, Lucy could not be a missing link because it was determined that man walked upright before the time of Lucy. But besides that, the skull on Lucy is slanted just like that of an ape. The knee joints don't fit together. The hip bones don't fit together. It's not realistic. It's just not true. Now, Dr. Colin Patterson, director of the British Museum of Natural History and a highly respected evolutionist, wrote a book about evolution. Now, when he was asked why his book did not include any illustrations of transitional fossils, Dr. Patterson, who has over 7 million fossils in his museum, said, and I quote, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossils or living, I certainly would have included it. I'll lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil for which one might make a watertight argument. So that hopefully puts things to rest. We're going to stop right here because we've got a lot more to cover when it comes to how you get living matter from non-living matter, and that's going to take a while to discuss. So I'm going to cut this video now, okay?
Okay, so that was quite a video. Not to be teasing or anything. He does have some questions. Obviously, he's asking these questions because he wants to know the answers. But before I get directly to them, I do want to specify. He does mention microevolution. He talks about macroevolution. He doesn't quite get it right. Microevolution. Well, first of all, let's talk about evolution itself first. Okay, evolution occurs for different reasons. One is genetic mutation, so genes actually really they randomly change. There's also selection, which is both natural and artificial, which we know well about because one of the things that he talks about in the video is dogs and species of dogs. Well, actually, the reason a lot of these dogs exist today is because humans took different aspects of dogs that they liked and bred them together. For example, hounds that used to be used for fox hunting were bred because of their superior ability to pick up scents.
Right.
Sheepdogs are specifically bred because they are very good at herding sheep. It is actually in their genetics to do certain things that humans have found favorable, and so we have this breeding selection that we've been doing over time to bring out these traits and have these different breeds of dogs do different things.
Right.
So there's also gene flow, which is obviously has to do with what you inherit from your parents and grandparents and all the generations before you, and genetic drift, which is something that happens naturally. For example, genes will change. For example, if you look at all the different tropical bird species,
Right.
if you have one island here and then 20 miles away you have another island, those birds could have shared the same ancestor, but because the plants on the two islands might be different, because one might start dieting on the insects and the other might start dieting more on nuts, their beaks are going to develop differently, and this is something that was observed when all these birds were first discovered in the Galapagos Islands, is specifically what I'm talking about. And so we can see that in populations that these animals are suited to their environments, because if you're not suited to your environment, you're going to die and you're not going to pass on your genes. So first, let's talk about microevolution. Is actually sort of a short-term evolution. It can be observed within a generation or two. Dog breeding is actually a good example, but there's another example that has to do with, for example, beetle populations. Let's say you spray a crop with some pesticides. Well, the beetles that aren't so resistant to those pesticides are obviously going to drop off dead because they can't eat those crops. The ones that are more resistant are the ones that are going to live, breed, and pass on their genes to the next generation. And then by the time that generation has babies of their own, they're not going to be the same as the generation that died off, for what should be obvious reasons. They inherited a property in their genes that they were resistant to the pesticide. So that's actually an example of microevolution, which can again be observed within our lifetimes. So it's not like we haven't seen an example of evolution in progress. Then he gets into macroevolution. Macroevolution is what most people think of when they hear evolution, basically one species turning into another. It's not quite so black and white as that, obviously. So macroevolution is on a scale of separated gene pools. There are changes that occur at and above the level of species. A good example of this, and this is proven genetically, so we do have the proof, the DNA proof, cows and dolphins actually share a common ancestor, even though one is a hoofed land animal, the other one has fins, although dolphins actually still have, you can see the bones that used to be longer limbs, or there's a bone that's underneath their spine toward the back of their bodies that used to be part of a hip.
Right.
Obviously, they have no use for hips anymore, so they don't have them. But that little bone is a remnant that otherwise really there's no reason for it to be there. It serves no purpose. Actually, humans ourselves today, we have in our own bodies perfect examples of macroevolution, because as much as some Christians have said, oh, humans are built so perfect, because we're the image of God. We're not perfect because we have organs inside our bodies that don't do anything. We have
Right.
people who need to get their tonsils taken out because they, if I'm not mistaken, they're usually people who have large tonsils, which is, again, a product of evolution, because now most people have small tonsils.
Right.
But we obviously come from a species that had bigger ones, that favored bigger ones. There are certain teeth that have to be taken out of our jaws because, again, our ancestors used to have bigger jaws. We have smaller jaws now, but we still grow those teeth. It's super uncomfortable, it causes a lot of pain. People have to yank them out. If we're so perfect, we shouldn't need to have our teeth yanked, our tonsils taken out. I had my
organs taken out.
There you go. I had my gallbladder removed, and I'm functioning more perfectly than ever. So there's just no reason for us to have these today if we were created so perfectly. It is evidence of evolution because those did at some point serve a purpose.
Yeah, they did something back then that we don't need today. So,
which is also why we have a tailbone. Because obviously, again, it's something that he says in the video is that we don't have missing links. But the thing is that we do. And we also have body parts, again, like our tailbone, that we really shouldn't have unless our ancestors did have a tail at some point. I'm not saying we come from monkeys, because we don't. Monkeys, apes, and humans come from a common ancestor. There's a difference. One of the things that he says is, we have a population of over 6 billion people. Why don't we have half ape and half man roaming around? Well, probably for the same reason that you're not going to have a half dog and half cat running around. It doesn't happen because genetically it can't. I'm not going to go and, for science and say, hey, someone try breeding with an ape to see if you can get a half human ape, a hape, okay? So, just to see if it'll happen. But the thing is that doesn't happen today, and it can't because the genetics are a little too different. But he says that there are no missing links. There's a ton of them. The only things that he addresses in the video, conveniently, are hoaxes or pieces that were found that were not whole skeletons. He talks about Lucy, but the thing about Lucy is she is a missing link. She is one of the hominids on our tree of hominids, that we came from. Or I shouldn't even say tree, I should say a bush, because a lot of people think, okay, you have this branch that goes off into species, and from that one came this one and this one and this one. Well, that only works on one branch. Instead, basically evolution is more like a bush where you have the main stem, but then you have thousands or hundreds of other stems that will stem again into hundreds of thousands of others, and not all of them live. A lot of those, actually most of life on our planet, most variety of life that we've had has died because they didn't have the genes to succeed in the environment that they were born in. The ones that did have the genetic mutations were obviously the ones to live and pass on their genes, which is why humans are actually, which is why we have 6 billion people in the world today, because our evolution favored our upright stances, the fact that we could use our hands, the fact that we have opposable thumbs, and our brains. Obviously and language, of course, going back to that, because we have language, we could communicate very well. And so that also allowed us to grow as a species. Actually, speaking of language, dolphins also have a very distinct language that scientists have only discovered in the past 5 years or so. And dolphins even have different call signs or names for each other.
Right.
And it's always been acknowledged that dolphins are an extremely smart species. And so evolution, any species that we as humans say, oh, that's a smart species, clearly they have some similar characteristics, actually. They have big brains. They have the ability to have a language, even though it might be, it's obviously not a language we can learn, in full. But my point is that if evolution favors, or if you as a person have favorable genes, if you as a creature does, you're going to pass on those genes. And so, obviously I think if evolution wasn't true, I would either look exactly like my mom or exactly like my dad, or better yet, I wouldn't need two parents because I could just be a copy of one, But anyway, let's go into his questions. So the first question, he goes from evolution and he starts talking about cosmology. These are two very different sciences. Obviously, evolution has to do with studying biology for one, has some chemistry for another. But cosmology is a totally different ball game. At one point, he actually says evolutionists need to answer these questions. Actually, no, it's cosmologists who are working on these questions. So let me actually get into that. His first question is, what's strong enough to crush the Earth to that size? And obviously he's talking about the pinhead size. So, what's strong enough to crush the Earth to that size? This question can't be answered directly in that sense, only because there is nothing to crush the Earth to that size.
But God can do it.
Oh, but the problem is there's no proof of it, which is, again, what science goes off of, is that we have to go off of this proof, which is why evolution and cosmology happen in the first place, because we're seeking the evidence instead of just going to one single book that really doesn't get into science at all and doesn't offer any satisfactory answers to these questions. First of all, you can't say what's strong enough to crush the Earth to just that size, because the Earth didn't exist when this pinhead happened, so to speak. This pinhead, I'm just going to say, what he's talking about is what's called a singularity. Cosmologists believe that there was a singularity in the beginning, and from that singularity is where the Big Bang came from. So all matter in the universe, was in this pinhead. However, what it is about this singularity is that a lot of the matter in our universe didn't exist at that time. When the singularity happened, that's the beginning, as we know it, of space-time. So from that, actually, in the universe, we know from studying this that helium filled space. It was mainly hydrogen, helium, lithium, and there were like minuscule amounts of two other elements. From all of that, and from density fluctuations in space, this matter eventually condensed to each other and formed the first galaxies and the first stars. Now, the thing is that the matter in Earth, for example, okay, we have soil, we have metals like gold, silver, we have all this stuff that wasn't first present, because a lot of it, a lot of the elements that are heavier than hydrogen are formed within the nuclear processes that stars do throughout their life. And so finally, if you have a star that's big enough, that's dense enough, and it swells to this gigantic size, it ends up creating a supernova. When it does that, it releases everything it created. I mean, long story short, what stars do is turn hydrogen into helium, turn helium, into the next heavier element, and it goes on and on and on until it reaches iron. When it reaches iron, it can't do it anymore. And the gravitational pull ends up, it can't fight the gravitational pull from the middle of the star, and so the star collapses and then explodes in a supernova. And so all those elements that were created get spread out into the universe. And eventually what happens is that they condense again into more stars and some into planets. Planets are actually failed stars that didn't have enough power, so to speak, to start the nuclear process. And so that's why we have gas planets like Jupiter and Saturn. The thing is that all this information is out there. You just have to be willing to learn it, to look for it. I even asked this one guy, he was arguing with me on evolution, and I said, look, I actually have I think it's a National Geographic special issue that just came out just on evolution. Would you like to take a look at it? No, I'm not going to read it. Well, why? The knowledge is there. Is it because you're afraid that you're going to be proven wrong? If you're so right in your position, you shouldn't be afraid to seek these answers. Anyway, let's get on to the second question. He asks, where did that pinhead come from? Evolutionists need to answer this. Again, it's cosmologists, not evolutionists. We don't know where it came from. And in science, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say we don't know. Just like a long time ago, we didn't know that the Earth orbited the sun. Unfortunately, today, I think some people still think that it doesn't. But obviously, we have the proof that it does. The proof is all over the place. You just need to, let me put it this way. It is not past your level of learning to learn these things. If you think it's too difficult, the answers are still there, and you can still find them. And you can still spend the time to understand them, and you shouldn't have the fear of trying to understand. You shouldn't be afraid to ask these questions. So we asked where it comes from. It's a question that can't be answered right now. We don't know. Maybe one day we'll have the technology to figure it out. I mean, a long time ago we didn't know that atoms existed, and now we do. We have this understanding because our technology has improved. Our ability to find these answers has gone global, and it's not just stuck to one society or two societies. It's this information is being shared all over, which is a beautiful thing. But again, the answer to that is we don't know, but that's okay, because maybe we'll know in the future. Number 3, his third question is, all matter and space in the pin, where was the pin floating? I would like to turn and ask, where does your God float? Because, again, if you're going to ask that question, you should ask yourself where God came from or where God was floating. But again, we don't know. This is a question that has to do with before the Big Bang. And it's not a very relevant question to ask right now, only because at the moment we can't answer it, and it has no effect on other things that we're actually researching. Which is, for example, how did galaxies form in the first place? We know most of the answer, we don't know all the details. But again, that's okay because we're learning. Number 4, how did non-living matter have the intelligence to turn itself into living matter? Well, before I get into it, would you like to...
Oh boy.
Would you like to comment maybe on why that question has a fallacy?
Have at it. Go ahead.
I mean, I'll keep it simple and I'll keep it real. Non-living matter obviously cannot have intelligence. You need to have living matter to gain that intelligence first. But what you have to understand about the universe is that it's all about energy transfer. It's all about getting an equilibrium. That's what life is actually about. It's about the transfer of energy. You consume energy and you spend energy and you put it back into the environment, and that's what all life does. Actually, that's what the universe does. That's what stars do. That's what even galaxies, of course, play with energy, so to speak. And there's this energy exchange everywhere, just going on all the time, even on the subatomic level when you're talking about protons and neutrons and electrons. And how they work, it's all about how the energy is trying to balance itself, right, and how it interplays with each other. I'm not going to get into it because, again, just take a science class. Just learn it. Don't be afraid to seek the answers. You say we need to answer these questions. The answers are out there already. You have to go and seek them. So that's totally up to you to either reference your one book or to actually go out and gain all the knowledge. The fifth question that he asks, what came first, oxygen or living matter? And just to answer that, actually living matter came first. We already know this. Because, oxygen obviously is an element that can be made inside the stars. However, we know from studying ancient bedrock and ancient fossils, and just from looking at what geology can provide from us, so this isn't about evolution, this is geology, we actually know that there were plants that created oxygen just like we create carbon dioxide when we breathe out. So later, to maximize that energy exchange, we had creatures develop that could breathe that oxygen and then turn it into carbon dioxide. So we actually already know the answer to that question. Again, you just have to go out and research it. And he says this is something you have to believe in if you believe in the Big Bang Theory. This is not about belief. It's about facts. Actually, there's a wonderful quote in there that addresses it.
Facts are stubborn things.
Yes, that facts are stubborn things. They're not going to change no matter what you believe. So, again, I can't reiterate this enough or iterate this enough. The answers are out there. You just have to go. This is not about beliefs. This is about seeking facts. I don't believe in the Big Bang Theory because my mom and dad told me to, or because the preacher man told me to. I believe in it because I've seen the evidence. I've read books about it. Actually, I'll just go ahead and name 2 great books out there that get into these topics extremely well. One is by Lawrence M. Krauss. He's a cosmologist and a teacher at the University of Arizona, a professor, I should say. And he wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It explains how a universe could have been created from nothing, that is also without divine intervention. So if you really, really want the answer to these questions, you can actually get them all in that one book. The second book, which is a little heavier reading, but still very good, is Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. I've read both these books. They're really fantastic, and they just touch upon the beginning of the subject. It's just, the knowledge out there is mind-blowing, and the understanding that these men have come to, and they really know how the universe works, for some of the part. Because obviously the more you learn, the more questions you have, but we can answer a lot of these questions, which is the wonderful thing. And it's not just God did it. So, I think that really covers this video. I don't think I have anything else to add, do you? All right, I've talked a lot. I really wanted to go over that video. I was very excited actually to answer all of those questions. But again, basically just, if you're a Christian and you really want to know the answers, don't just open up one book, open up many books. Don't just talk to, one man in one building. Go and talk to many people in many buildings. And again, we live in the information age. It's so easy just to hop on your phone or to hop on your computer and just find out these questions for yourself. So that's really all I have to say on that matter. That's all for today, and we hope you enjoyed the show. And we'll let you know about our next episode on the Facebook page in due time, so please feel free to subscribe. Until then, please take care and seek knowledge.